Come on in to Margaret McSweeney's Kitchen for Kitchen Chat, where every week you'll meet chefs, cookbook authors, foodies, gourmets, and just plain people who love to eat. And along with laughter, chat, recipes, and stories about food, you'll sometimes also hear words of inspiration, love, and hope. As Margaret always says, Kitchen Chat is food for the senses and food for the soul. So grab a cup of coffee, put your feet up on a comfy chair, and get ready to spend a little time with Margaret and her friends.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Kitchen Chat. This is Margaret McSweeney, your host on webtalkradio.net, and welcome to my kitchen. I am so glad that you are joining me here today, and actually, I have some news I'd like to share. You know, the kitchen is a place where we all gather and share our celebrations, share our concerns, share our recipes, share our friendship, and all of that. And with that in mind, I just would like to share some surprising news that I received right before Mother's Day. I have just been recently diagnosed with breast cancer. It is fortunately at the early stage, and I'm so grateful. And a reminder, women out there, please take the time to get your mammograms. That is so important when you can detect and diagnose cancer at an early stage. It's much easier to treat. So right now, I'll be having some important conversations with my husband and family regarding the next step in terms of decision making for surgery and treatment. And I appreciate your thoughts and prayers during this process, but I assure you that I will continue Kitchen Chat. This is such a special part of me, and I so enjoy being in the kitchen and hearing from you all. And so anyway, it's ironic here in 2012, as I recently just celebrated my 50th birthday. I am not only on a culinary quest, but also a cancer quest. And I guess you could call this C squared, my C squared journey, culinary and cancer. Who would have thought? But anyway, I'm positive. I want to remain positive through this. And as I said, I'm so grateful it is at the early stage. And my kind of taglines, I guess, through this journey have become know before you go, in terms of making the choices for your own, my own individual treatment with this cancer, and also face it, embrace it, and erase it. So hopefully this will, as I call it, be my unexpected lump in the road. And I'm so appreciative of the many doctors and friends, family, and of course faith that is helping me navigate around this lump in the road. So anyway, with that being said, I'm so delighted to introduce a dear friend, to reintroduce, who needs no introduction. He's been on Kitchen Chat a few times before, and I so admire him, Chef Carl Raymond. And Chef Carl, welcome back to my kitchen.
Margaret, it is always a pleasure to be with you in your kitchen, and thank you so much for sharing this special show with me. It is certainly with great thoughts and prayers that we send all positive energy to you, and that's important.
It is important, and thank you so much. I really appreciate that, and I just can't wait to hear about the very exciting things that are going on in your kitchen, Carl, and out of the kitchen. If I could just quickly remind listeners of your accomplished repertoire. You are the chef instructor at Astor Center there in New York City. I've actually taken, a cooking class there before. It's fabulous. I encourage those in the New York City area, definitely look for Chef Carl Raymond at Astor Center, and those looking for a cooking destination, check that out too. And most recently, you've added a very exciting new title, and that is food editor of Mommyverse, which we are going to discuss soon. A whole new focus on Latin food. It is just so exciting to hear about, and I can't wait to hear a little bit later about how you have just really embraced this the cuisine and the new techniques of preparation and the great things you've done with Mommyverse Food. But before we get to that, Carl, catch us up on your cooking lessons and what you're seeing in terms of trends of people who are looking for cooking classes.
Well, absolutely. And, I love my new role as food editor, and I can't wait to talk with you about that. But, at my heart, I'm really first and foremost a teacher and have been for quite some time now. And when you look over the past few years of what's going on, is the best news is that people are really coming back to cooking classes in droves. And whether it's because they've seen things on TV and they want to learn a little bit more about them, or it's too expensive sometimes to go out and buy the food that they used to in restaurants and they want to do it at home. Whatever the real reasons are, people really are coming back in a very strong way. And over the past few years, I really have seen some things evolve, which are very exciting. One is that people really want to learn technique now. They're really allowing themselves to divorce themselves a little bit from, I'm just going to cook a recipe. People want to know how to roast, and they want to know how to saute, and they want to know how to pan fry, and all these various things. And once you understand those, then really the world of cooking opens up to you, and you can start to cook anything and don't feel so tied to just what the recipe tells you to do. You actually know the techniques. In fact, I also teach at a very small school here, and we don't even use recipes when we do a class. So that's sort of interesting. Another thing I see a lot are people coming into cooking classes really looking for community. People are really discovering how much fun it is to cook together, and all of a sudden you have, your 14 new best friends. But it really is fun to cook together, and we're seeing a lot of that.
And it's so interesting, Carl, because I remember just with my one visit to your kitchen there at Astor Center, there really is a sense of community. I mean, we were all sitting around that table there in the kitchen after preparing that incredible James Beard-inspired meal. I remember that. And you're right. I think this is what people are really looking for, too, is a place to connect and to create.
It's funny. It's true. So many times after classes, nobody gets up and leaves. Everyone just is happy sitting there, which is wonderful. They're talking. And, I think the image that we see so much today is people watching food media or food TV while they're sitting eating their takeout. And there's a huge irony to that, of course. So I'm glad people are coming to class. I find people really want to see the basics now, but they're also willing to really explore, two things. They're really willing to explore new cuisines. I spend a lot of time teaching Moroccan and North African and Indian and Southeast Asian, and obviously none of these are new cuisines.
Right.
But the fact that people, they do take unique ingredients that, people may not be familiar with, and people are fascinated to learn about these different things. The other fascinating trend that is very common now is people are really curious where the food comes from. Now, this whole farm-to-table movement has been going on for some years, but people are really fascinated now in cuts of meat. People are going to butchering classes. Now, I don't teach these, but you would be really surprised at how popular these are because people are interested where the cuts of meat come from, how that affects the taste, how that affects the cooking, all these things. And you never used to see that, a number of years ago. So the curiosity about food is really, I see it in every single class I teach.
That is great. So once again, the major trends, the technique, community, cuisine, and would you call it charcuterie? Is that kind of the
charcuterie is really charcuterie is really the curing of things like sausages and meats and things like that. It's really butchery. It's really taking a side of an animal and breaking it down into the various cuts in the shoulder and the loin and the rib. And once you understand that, all those cuts actually are cooked very differently. And I often say, if it's a part of the animal that flapped or ran or whatever, jumped or whatever it did, that means there's a lot of fat and cartilage in that meat. And so you want to cook it for a long period of time, very slow, and let all of that break down. And it also helps to keep the meat moist, but also flavorful.
Oh, that is great. And what is your favorite new spice that you're using with your Moroccan food? I don't know a lot about Moroccan cuisine.
Well, Moroccan cuisine is one of the really extraordinary cuisines of the world for a number of reasons. Morocco is a country that has tremendous natural resources, for sure. You have the sea, you have the mountains, you have forest, you have desert. You also have a culture that has been influenced by many other cultures over the years. There's the traditional Berber population. There was the obviously enormous influence of the Arabs. You have the Spanish from the north, and of course much later you have the French that colonized Morocco. So all those cuisines do come together in the food. Also, Morocco, the royal court really supported food. Food was very, very important in the royal cuisine. And that allowed other spices to come from around the world and really support the cuisine in the country. So it's really extraordinary. But in terms of some of the spices and what is my favorite, one is cumin, which you find, interestingly, you do find it in Middle Eastern cooking, you find it in North African cooking, and you also find it in Latin cooking. So my apartment and my kitchen is sort of permanently perfumed with cumin these days.
And how would you describe the fragrance of cumin?
Oh, there's a slightly bitter, tart, tangy aroma to it. It's really one of my favorites. And the truth with a lot of these spices is that we're used to buying them in the little containers already ground. One of the things that you can do that will make the flavor even better is to buy the whole spice, buy the whole seeds, and then buy yourself a coffee grinder that you do nothing with except grind spices, unless you want cumin in your coffee in the morning. But you can toast those spices, those whole seeds, in just a dry saute pan, and it allows the oils and the aromas to release, and then put them in your coffee grinder and grind them, and the flavor is just extraordinary. So if you want a little bit more kick in your spices, that's a way to do it. And I will say to everybody, make sure you don't keep your spices too long. When I was growing up, I think my mother kept spices for years on end, and they really do, lose their flavors.
So do they have an expiration date, or you just kind of go by?
They don't. The basic rule of thumb is if your spices are on your shelf longer than 6 months, you need to replace them.
Well, there goes my spice cabinet.
I'll come over and we'll go through it.
That sounds great. And I'm so excited to hear about you're using cumin to cook with your Latin dishes. But before we get to Mommyverse, and I can't wait to chat about that, just to go back to the cooking classes.
Sure.
What should a potential home chef look for in terms of choosing a class?
Well, I love that question because, as I said earlier, there are so many people that are going back or coming to cooking classes for the first time now. The curiosity is certainly peaked. People want to, roll up their sleeves and get their hands dirty a little bit. And the good news is that there's more opportunity now than there ever was. There are more, recreational cooking programs that are open, and there is a huge variety of classes out there. And what I think is very important is that when you want to take a cooking class, you have to think about what kind you want to take. And there are usually two different kinds. There are straight demo classes where a chef will stand up in front of you and will do a demonstration of all the dishes where you probably don't get your hands dirty at all. You might get a glass of wine, but you don't get your hands dirty. Then there are classes that, as you know, which was the format that you took, which is very hands-on, where there's a little bit of demo, but there's a lot of hands-on work. There's a lot of cooking those dishes together. And you really have to decide what you want. It's my opinion, if you really want to learn to cook, then you need to get a hands-on element in there, because you can watch me forever, but until you really touch the food, until you handle the knife, till you understand how those things look in the pan, when they're really done, and you sort of understand those things for yourself, corrected by a chef, that's when you really start to learn to cook. There's nothing wrong with going to demo classes. I think people will always learn things with those, but that's almost more for entertainment value. The other thing that I would say is that if you really want a good cooking class, make sure it's at least 3 hours long. I know that sounds like a long time, but if you're really going to cook the food yourself, there are some classes that are much shorter, and they're okay, and they give you a little taste of things, but I think you really need a little bit more time in the kitchen to prepare those dishes. So when you're looking for cooking classes to take, look for some of these things. And also look for chefs' certain specialties. I certainly have mine. We all, as cooking teachers, have to teach a wide range of things. but I certainly have my specialties that I love to teach, and I think that's important too, that you don't come to me for a pastry class, come to me for an Indian class.
And I am going to put that on my list of things to do, Carl, for sure. When it's great to have that hands-on opportunity, but when we come home alone to the kitchen, that's when fear sets in. What are your favorite resources in terms of cookbooks on the variety of levels? For those who need an easy to follow recipe, and those who really like a challenge in terms of creating a gourmet meal. What are your favorite cookbook resources?
Well, when you're first sort of building your cookbook, I mean, it's a little scary. I look around my apartment, and I've at this point probably got close to 500 cookbooks. I've really got to weed some of these out. But anyway, there are some real basics that I think are essential and people that you should really look at that will give you not only some simple recipes, but also very flavorful recipes, and that will also help you understand the technique. And one person that I think is essential to go to is Mark Bittman. And he's just come out with, it's sort of the new illustrated cookbook. I don't have the right title, but it's really a wonderful book because it's all illustrated with photography and accompanied with recipes. So not only do you see a wide variety of really wonderful recipes that you can make, but he also talks about the techniques that are involved, as I was saying earlier, the sauté or whatever, steaming or whatever it happens to be, so that you really learn what's behind the recipe. And I was really happy to see that. Another cookbook, which is a great go-to book, it's called Cooking Know-How, and the authors are Bruce Weinstein and Mark Scarborough. And that book goes by classic dishes, but also breaks them down into technique and then gives you a lot of variations. So once you understand how to make the certain principal technique, then you can go off and make 10 other recipes just by varying the ingredients. And that's also extremely visual. And I love that book. I also think when people are learning to cook, one of the great go-to chefs really is Jamie Oliver. I love his joie de vivre for sure. I love his personality, but he, in a very conversational way, explains to you what's going on in the recipes. He, of course, insists on good, fresh ingredients, but Jamie's books are really wonderful.
That is great to know. And do you have any hints for the home cook in terms of how to really effectively prepare menus? I think that is my biggest challenge in terms of do you sit down and plan the week ahead? Do you train, daily? I mean, what do you have any quick tips? Mm-hmm.
I actually, believe it or not, I actually do that because if every day is a huge challenge and you're, it's sort of the 6:30 meltdown at night, I don't know, and you look in the refrigerator and you don't have this. I really do believe that you need to sit down and think through. It doesn't have to be completely prescribed, but, if you're going to buy some chicken, are you going to have that a couple nights a week in a couple of different ways? Think through those things. Think through how to use the vegetables. One night they might be a side dish, asparagus, for example, and then the next night or the night after, you could cut it up and sauté it and mix it in with some rice, and then use part of that chicken that you roasted 2 days ago. I just think it's a very efficient and certainly economical way of using food so that you don't panic every single day and realize that there's no food in there. Yeah.
Yes. And do you have any recommendations in terms of, do you just use a regular notebook, or do you have, is there a special online tools for,
there might be, I've heard that there are, a lot of apps out there now that address this sort of thing. I just got my iPhone a couple of months ago, so I'm really still working with that. But for me, I just make a couple of notes on a piece of paper and think about things. Usually what I try to do is pick one or two principal proteins for the week. So it might be chicken and pork or chicken and salmon or whatever it happens to be. And then I think through a couple of variations of what I'm going to do with that. One of the best things you can always make is a roast chicken because it's very easy and it's a great meal. But then you've got all that meat on hand, so what do you do with it? Maybe it's a soup. Maybe it's a sandwich. Maybe it's tossed with pasta. You've already gotten 2 other meals that you can get, out of something like that. Same thing is true of a pork tenderloin. You'll roast that pork tenderloin and have a beautiful, meal one evening. But that also makes great sandwiches, and that's really great on top of a salad, just some tossed greens and a little bit of sliced pork, and then maybe you make a dressing for it. So if you think of a couple proteins every week that you use, I think that's a good way to think about it. Not
Great.
every night.
Perfect. No, that is great. That is a great idea. Thank you for sharing that. Now, I am so excited to talk about your new endeavor as food editor of Mommyverse. And listeners, that's MAMIVERSC, and I'll provide a link, mommyverse.com. And what's so fascinating, it's the online voice for Latina moms, families, and foodies and positivity. I love that tagline. But it goes beyond that, too. I mean, you don't have to be a mom to access these incredible resources, especially on the food section, for which you are the new food editor. And just by way of background, it's so fascinating, Carl, that looking at the trends, because as a former Wall Street banker, I'm always looking at the business side of things, and I did not realize that the Hispanic market for Latin cuisine, as the data as researched by marketresearch.com, projects sales of $14 billion by 2014. Yeah. I mean, that is just amazing. I mean, Latin food seems to be just a really great growing trend, and how exciting that you are on the forefront of this with Mommyverse, which has just been launched. So first of all, if you could just tell us specifically a little bit more about Mommyverse.
Sure.
And what your role is in terms of launching this from the
Well, absolutely, and I love the statistic that you just gave, because it's, yes, Latin food is increasing, but it's the Latin population, that's really increasing. And you see now just general consumer product companies all of a sudden launching, Fiesta brands or things that have Latin flavorings in them. It's really quite extraordinary. But Mommyverse.com has been around for about a year now, and it was launched by a dear publishing colleague of mine that I worked with, who really saw an opportunity in the marketplace to address something that was not addressed, and it was for Latino women and their families, and how to better connect with their families through a variety of subjects. Pretty extraordinary that it didn't exist quite in the same way, but it has been very successful since it launched. And then 2 months ago, we launched Mommyverse Food, and I was brought on board because not only of my publishing background, but of course my food background, to create this food channel to really, one of the whole point of the site is, what are points of connection for a family, and what better one than food, right?
Yes, right. Yes.
So it was about, the goals and objectives were a number of things. It was, of course, how to provide recipes for wonderful, great tasting food, also have a healthy food and better eating element, which, we all need to think about these days. And the positivity is to really bring a source of inspiration, to bring people around the table and to connect with families. And a lot of what we're doing is, I'm working on recipes that moms can cook with kids and dads can cook with kids. So it's not just a question of eating together, but it's actually preparing the food together. And that's super important, because that is one of the greatest ways that kids learn better nutrition. They learn how to cook themselves, and that, of course, empowers them through their entire lives. So it's a pretty ambitious goal, but so far it's working. And I couldn't be prouder to be part of Mommyverse.
Oh, this is so exciting. And I am so impressed with the resources you have on there. I mean, one of the featured chefs is Executive Chef Daisy Martinez. And share a little bit about what she is doing in terms
Absolutely.
of
Well,
her role.
Listeners will certainly know Chef Daisy's work from her series on PBS, and then her follow-up series on the Food Network. So she is very much one of the most beloved celebrity chefs. We just had her on the Today Show launching Mommyverse a couple of weeks ago. So that's great. And she produces video content for us. If you go on to the food channel of Mommyverse, you'll see over 20 videos where Daisy actually takes you through preparing basic dishes with, of course, her very special flair and flavor, and tells you how to do them. Also, she contributes original content. She's written articles for the site and continues to do that. And also, we promote her books. She's done several books with wonderful recipes, which we've reprinted some of those on the site and tied them to various holidays and events and things like that. So she very much is our executive chef. She's very much the face of Mommyverse Food, and I couldn't be happier to be working with her.
That is right. And you also on the line, and I encourage all the listeners out there, go to mommyverse.com and click under the food section. You have some very interesting contributors as well, Eva Longorio, I noticed.
Well, what we have done with her is she published a book on her kitchen and on her cooking, and so we worked with her publisher, and they allowed us to reprint some of the recipes from her. But whether you're a great celebrity or whether you're a food blogger or whether you're just a regular mom or you're a chef somewhere in between, it doesn't matter. We cover all of those perspectives on Mommyverse Food because it is all about tying people together with food. And whether you're a celebrity or a mom, it's really the same thing.
Yes, exactly. You're all a star in the kitchen.
Well, I hope so.
Exactly. Now, let's chat a bit about Latin cuisine. What is, I guess, the marquee, would you say, the trademark of Latin cuisine, and how has it surprised you in learning how to embrace this new technique in cuisine?
Well, the interesting thing about Latin food is fun. And if you had to put a label on it, you'd put spice. Now that doesn't mean that every single Latin dish is spicy, because that isn't true. But as I've said earlier, a lot of my background is in Middle Eastern and Indian and cuisines that use a tremendous amount of spice. Latin cuisine uses a tremendous amount of spice and a lot of flavor. But one, I think, of the most surprising things that people may not realize is the just enormous breadth of Latin cooking. You have Puerto Rican and Dominican and all the islands of the Caribbean. You have Mexico, all the different regions of Mexico, which is, that in itself is an extraordinary subject. Central and South America, Peruvian, Brazilian, all of these. And of course, then you have Spain and, the cuisines in the Spanish influenced cuisines in Europe. So it's really enormous when you think about it. It's sort of looking at Chinese cooking and the enormity of that and the regionalities of that. And that's why I love it. What is fascinating is that you do see some similarities with other cuisines. If you take, and it usually is in terms of the flavor and how flavors are built in those cuisines. When you look at basic French cooking, you usually start with a basic onion, celery, and carrot, and then you kind of build from there. Mm-hmm. When you're in India, you start often with a flavor base of onion, garlic, and ginger. Well, Latin cooking often starts with onion, garlic, and peppers. So you can see how you start with a flavor base like that, and it is very similar in the way it's used around the world. I personally love the chili peppers in some of the Mexican dishes, and my living room is full of dried chili peppers right now.
It must be so fragrant, Carl.
It's wonderful.
I think that is so fun and so decorative too.
Another thing that I find really fascinating in the world of Latin cooking is, and I'm going to say a really scary word that a lot of chefs don't like, and you can certainly debate that, but that's, believe me, a whole other show. But the word is fusion. And what that means is, cuisines that some chefs refer to it as confusion, but really it's about different cuisines that come together and bring the best parts of both of them, and then they fuse into something new. And a couple of trends that I find fascinating that I'm seeing is, one is the Latin Southern blend, and I will use that word instead of fusion. I just did a feature interview with an extraordinary chef. Her name is Sandra Gutierrez. She's based down in the South, and she's just published a book called The New Latin Southern Cuisine. And it's really about who would ever have thought that Latin and Southern food would go together, or at least in the way that, you might think. Well, they do. There's also influences of Latin and Jewish cooking going together in certain places around the world, and also Latin and Asian. And I just recently found a restaurant that was specializing in Latin and Indian. So really interesting stuff. It's taking those, again, the basic flavors and bringing them together in a very new way.
Well, my heart is in the South, having grown up in Alabama, so
Good.
I'd love to take a step back here and talk about this new trend in terms of the fusion or whatever with the Southern cuisine, new Latin Southern cuisine. Could you chat a little bit about what you're seeing there and what Chef Sandra?
Well, a little bit about that is I need to hook you up with Sandra so that you can have a whole kitchen.
Oh, I would love that because I hope they still use grits.
Yes, but let's put a little bit of cumin in there, or coriander, or a little bit of spice, or chipotle, or something, right? So,
right.
Yeah,
Oh.
it's taking the very best of some of those dishes and adding something to it, and it really is wonderful to see what's evolving. A lot of the fish dishes that are so wonderful in the South really are, you get some benefit from a little bit of, green pepper on there.
Right, and healthy too, I'm sure. So less fried, maybe. I don't know. I mean,
Well, that's a very important thing because that's another thing that's really going on, not only in Latin cooking, obviously, but in the cuisines all over the world, is looking at making them a little bit healthier. There's an article on the homepage of the Food Channel right now by a registered dietitian talking about the issue of acid reflux, which in the Latin population is a significant issue, as it is elsewhere. And it's an article to raise consciousness, but also includes a couple of recipes that are very traditionally Latin influenced, and they're just lightened up a little bit to actually cut down on that acid, because over time that really can be problematic. So yes, definitely healthier.
Yes, and one thing I do want to mention to the Kitchen Chat listeners is that it is all in English. The whole website is all in English.
Yes.
So you don't need to go in and translate. And could you share with us the purpose behind that?
Well, there obviously, populations are evolving, and there is very much a tremendously significant part of the Latin population right now that doesn't use Spanish as their everyday language. They come from that. They may or may not understand it, but they're not using it as their everyday language, and that's why we chose to do the site in English.
Right. So, it's just a great resource for Latin cuisine and to try something new and try the spices. And you're featuring something, is that right, Carl, coming up for Father's Day as well?
Yes, we have a great story which we'll be posting next week, and it's from the dad's perspective. It's a dad that cooks for his family and loves cooking with his young daughter, and is absolutely teaching her about food. And, I just interviewed a chef last week, and we'll be posting that interview, who talked again about growing up and how he first learned about, the first food influence in his life, and it was cooking with his aunt, or was sitting on a little stool and watching her cook. So, that's really how people do learn. So, but I wanted to make sure we had a little bit of the dad's perspective in there just for Father's Day.
And that is great. And that's important too, because it's not only, for the mom, but for everyone. And I think everyone embraces Latin cuisine. And here in Chicago, of course, Rick Bayless and his success with the Frontera restaurants and cookbooks.
We have some of the recipes of Rick's on the site too. He's definitely one of our featured favorites.
Oh yes, and who are some other I guess you would say keynote chefs who have brought Latin cuisine to the forefront?
Well, the one that I always go back to the classics. I mean, there are many chefs that are doing some extraordinary things, but I always think you do have to at least go back and start with the classics. And Diana Kennedy is the one that really brought Mexican cooking, particularly to the forefront a number of years ago here in the United States. She's still cooking and teaching in Mexico, but she did a number of books that really are the seminal works for that, because she spent years and years going to all the different regions of Mexico and came back and wrote these books. And it was a time when that was just not well known at all. So she's one of my favorites.
Oh, that's good. And speaking of favorites, what so far has been your favorite Latin dish to prepare?
Oh, hands down, mole.
Huh.
Mole is, if you do the translation, mole is a sauce, and it's Mexican, and it really, while there are moles in different parts of Mexico, mole really is best known in Oaxaca. And it's a combination of, you have the onions and the garlic, and you have the peppers and all that, but also in one of the classic moles, you also introduce chocolate into the sauce, and it's Mexican chocolate, which is very different from the kind of chocolate that we think of here. And the reason that I love mole, it's served with chicken, or there are other things you can serve it with, but it's a very complex, layered sauce. And I love things like curries and things that do have a lot of layers to them. So when I started playing around with mole, I mean, it's an enormous subject, and you could be cooking moles your entire life. But that's one of my favorites is making a mole sauce with something.
Wow. Okay. And is that something you can provide a recipe for?
Oh, sure. Now, I will tell you that mole, there is a wonderful one on our site. I will encourage readers or listeners to go. It's the mole that Aaron Sanchez, who people will know from Food Network, he supplied his version of mole sauce. So I will steer people to that. It takes a lot of ingredients, and it takes usually a long time to cook because the flavors, of course, have to meld and cook for a while. But it's really just a spectacular thing.
And does it take a lot? Does it take a lot of stirring time too? Or are you constantly?
No, it's a lot of simmering. You have to let all those flavors kind of get to know each other and blend. That's one of the sort of rules of cooking, regardless of the cuisine, is that often these things taste better the next day, and it's just simply because the flavors have to combine and they have to meld and they have to mellow out together, and then you get a beautiful tasting thing. But I mean, a good fish taco tastes good to me too, or enchiladas, or anything with melted cheese. That's really hard, I have to say.
And what cheese do you mostly see used in Latin dishes?
Well, it's funny. There are a lot of different, many different cheeses. Particularly the cotija is one that is used. Queso fresco is one.
And I'm sorry, Carl. What was that first one you mentioned?
Cotija. It's a Mexican white cheese, as is queso fresco. But they're different cheeses. Some of them are more conducive to melting than others, depending on what you want to do with them. But it's really worth finding a good local cheese shop if you have one, and start experimenting with some of the Mexican and Latin cheeses, just to get yourself away from mozzarella and brie and things like that.
And traveling outside of Mexico, what has been one of your favorite recipes from some of the other Latin American countries?
Can I go to Europe though? I mean, I was in Spain. Yes. Well, there are a lot of them. Let me answer it. Actually, I'm fascinated by Peruvian cuisine right now, and I'm spending a lot of my personal time working with some of those dishes because Peruvian cooking is becoming much more popular, much more, you're finding Peruvian restaurants in a number of cities now. So that's one that I'm really fascinated with.
And what would be on a Peruvian menu?
One of my favorite is a chicken dish, which starts with a classic bechamel sauce, but then you add peppers to it and olives and eggs, and the combination of flavors is just completely intoxicating as far as I'm concerned. But I love Spanish cooking. A paella, things like that, where you have the meats and the fish and the shrimp and everything just cooking with the rice and the savory flavors. And also, Spanish cooking often uses saffron, which is a spice you will find, of course, in North Africa, and it is the most expensive spice in the world. Saffron is the little stamen of the crocus, and it takes whatever the statistic is, an entire football field worth of flowers to just produce a single pound of saffron. So and it all has to be done by hand. But it is a beautiful color, and it is an extraordinary taste when you taste things made with saffron. So
and how would you describe the taste of saffron? I don't think I've ever had that, Carl.
It's one of those things that if you have too much of it, you'll taste it and you'll hate it. It can taste extremely medicinal if there's too much, or if it's used too heavily. It's one of those tastes that if it's not there, it doesn't really taste right. If you're making a Moroccan tagine or you're making a Spanish paella or whatever, if you don't have your saffron in it, it just doesn't taste right. It's like there are things when you're doing in Thai cooking, if you don't have the fish sauce or the lime juice or the lemongrass or whatever it is, it just doesn't taste quite right. And that's very much the truth of saffron. I don't know how I would quite describe it, because you don't want to ever taste a dish and say, "Oh, love that saffron."
Okay. So it's the subtlety.
It is absolutely the subtlety.
Okay, and the community of flavors with which
absolutely.
it mixes. Oh, that's so neat. And of course, my heart is also with Brazil, since I lived there for 6 months. So
that's right.
Yes, the only Portuguese-speaking country, I might add, in South America. But do you include them in some wonderful, fun recipes on?
Absolutely. I need to edit them, but I just got 3 Portuguese recipes, which we'll be including, and some of those, stews and grills and things like that are just wonderful. I mean, you can see the diversity of the flavor and the diversity of the recipes is just extraordinary in Latin cooking. I don't know if I'll ever go back to Europe again.
Huh. Wow. So hopefully this will inspire you to do a lot of traveling then too, outside of the kitchen.
Oh, absolutely. I definitely need to go south of the border here and look at some of this. Absolutely.
Oh, that sounds great. Well, I am just so excited, Carl, about your new position as food editor of Mommyverse and helping launch Mommyverse Food. And listeners, I will make sure that we do provide the link to mommyverse.com. Also, please follow on Twitter at Mommyverse for some great tips and articles going on too. And it's just a great resource. So thank you for sharing with us about Latin cuisine. I've learned so much and can imagine the fragrance of your kitchen, Carl, when you're testing these recipes. So.
It's hard to avoid. Margaret, thank you so much. Such a pleasure as always to be with you and thinking of you a lot. And we'll keep talking and eating.
Definitely. And listeners, please connect with Carl and please connect with me here on Kitchen Chat on webtalkradio.net. I love to hear from you. And next week we're doing something interesting. I'm going to be broadcasting in front of a live audience at Barrington Library here in the Chicago suburbs on June 11th at 7 in the evening. I hope those of you in the area can join me. I will be interviewing Amelia Levin, who has just compiled a wonderful new book called Chicago Chef's Table Cookbook with recipes from famous Chicago chefs. So I'll be interviewing her on Kitchen Chat, and she will be there for a book signing and also to answer questions. But thank you again, dear listeners, for taking the time to tune into Kitchen Chat and to visit with me and Carl in my kitchen. And thank you so much for your thoughts and prayers during this cancer journey along with my culinary quest. I look forward to being in touch, and always remember, and I think it takes on even more poignant meaning now, just always remember, savor the day.
Thank you for joining us today. If you're interested in Margaret's books, A Mother's Heart Knows, Pearl Girls, Encountering Grit, Experiencing Grace, and Go Back and Be Happy, please just click on the covers on the webtalkradio.net page in front of you. Margaret would love to connect with you and hear from you, so join her on Twitter, Facebook, her blog, or click on this website to leave a note and share a recipe. Thank you again, and we'll see you here again for a new show next week.